So that was recorded. That was recorded 34 years ago. And when you come to this new Center for Advancing the American Dream in Washington, across from the White House and Treasury, it's part of a 90-minute documentary created. So when you think about finance and capital, we're really talking about what is prosperity for you. And this is a formula I wrote down almost 60 years ago after the Watts riots in Los Angeles on August 11th, 1965. And it was really focused on the world's largest asset, human capital, your potential. That's your HC, social capital. And we needed a multiplier effect on that in order to understand, and that was finance. So we needed all these different forms of finance that could multiply these issues. And social capital is something you live with every day, whether it's the rule of law or property rights or universal education or healthcare, etc. And what people don't realize when we talk about finance is that financial assets, which are around 150 trillion in the United States, are very small compared to the value of social and human capital, which is estimated to be worth between 1,500 and 2,000 trillion. And so it's 10 times is more important, and it's 50 times the size of our economy. And so one of the things we are all focused on in the future of finance is the challenge here that you'll see where the United States has one of the highest average net worths in the world. It has one of the most lower average net worth, and then a large percentage of the population, as you've heard earlier today and during this week, has a net worth under 10,000. So how do we provide access to capital? Now, some of the programs happening today in private equity, which has become a very large part of our economy, approaching almost 20% of the employees, a lot of wages, they pay their employees more. They're launching new programs such as Ownership Works, where every single employee of the company gets ownership. And so we're seeing these opportunities. But as you know, everything is not equal in America. So if you were born in Charlotte, North Carolina, your chance to rise up from the lowest socioeconomic to the highest is substantially less than if you were born in Salt Lake City. And so your zip code should not determine your future. So there's a number of initiatives. One of these initiatives that's coming out is to give $1,000 in a tax-free savings account, no fees, for every child that's born in America, and others can. And we'll see in the next year or two whether this can be adopted. Many employers have offered to support not only the government giving $1,000 for everyone born, but contributing to these funds, so you never have to borrow to go to college in your lifetime. Another one is Invest in America accounts, similar to what's going on with the federal savings program. And can we create these accounts for everyone that doesn't have a 401k or some other? The ability to generate a rate of return on your money over time is exceedingly important here, in the sense that it isn't necessarily where you start. It's the rate of return and being able to compound this money tax-free. So you can see in 40 years, if you wanted to have $1 million, if you can get 12%, which many of the people on the panel sure you will get you today. You only need to put up 10,000. If you're getting zero and you're not saving money, you'd have to put up 25,000 a year. So these are, and once again, what is the American dream? We need to make sure is available to everyone. It's the dream of this land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone, with opportunity to each according to your ability and achievement, and it involves access to capital. So to begin with, many of the new structures that have been created in these money management accounts have been created so that part of the benefits of these rates of return go directly into areas of health and education. Joel, can you talk us about Pathfinder, where the idea comes from? As I see it, you're going to eventually give away $200 million here to the world in the sense of healthcare and education as a byproduct of the success of these funds that you've created.
Yeah, and so if you look about the way we invest at Ares, we have about $470 billion, and the group I manage is about $45 billion. And I joined 6 years ago, and to speak to a little bit about what's talked to today, it's really been a story of hope, it's been a story of progress, and it's been a story of karma. If you think about it, and you talk about the American dream, Mike, I am the living American dream. You know, I'm a poor, my dad was a Baptist pastor. I grew up in Oregon and Idaho, kind of had to put myself through college, had to pay through that, had to go to a state college to do that, somehow ended up here. Had no business ending up here, if you think about the zip code, as you mentioned, that I was raised in. And, you know, I wanted to come up with a way to give back. I didn't want trust fund kids. I wanted my kids to earn their own way. I wanted to be able to give back to charity, as you have, obviously, across your family foundation. And so when I joined Ares 6 years ago, I had one simple ask. I said, I will run this group on a co-head with alternative credit, but I want to have a charity tie-in to whatever I do next. And I was inspired by a trip I did to India 7 years ago. And when you're in the slums of Dharavi and Mumbai, it inspires you. You get a lot of perspective with regards to what's really important in life. And what we came up with regards to the funds and our flagships is at least 10% of our promote, which is the way we get paid, our carry, our promote, our profits that come off of the fund that we get paid, our portion of it. At least 10% of the profits of that fund, half from Ares, half from our team, goes to health and education charities across Africa, across Asia, across the US, and across Europe. And so that multiplier effect, we now have over $17 billion of funds. So that hope of this future, the progress with regards to what's going on across health and education, and it really does go to health inequity as well as education inequity, it's helping lift. You know, I was in Senegal last week for a board. I was inspired by Path Global Health, which is a board I've sat on for the last 7 years, and they do amazing work across vaccination programs across the entire developing world. And it's this mechanism that we think can do more, because if you look at it, there's always, Wall Street's always been generous. You know, there's always been a generosity of individuals. There's always been generosity with regards to it, but there hasn't been a mechanism. There hasn't been that mechanism to give, that mechanism to kind of drive that. And so the reason I believe in karma is that our progress, we've been the fastest growing group inside of Ares. The growth we've had across our flagship funds has been amazing. I think is really attributed to that dream and that hope with regards to what we've ended up doing. So for me personally, the greatest decision, I always say the second best decision I ever made in my life. The first was, you know, buying a drink for my wife 27 years ago. And she lives we live in Atlanta, so of course she definitely could hear about this. So I look at it as, from that standpoint, the second best decision or idea I ever had was this charitable tie-in, because it drives so much. Everything we're doing, every investment we're making is driving that impact and going that. And the numbers you're quoting, I can't quote because it's projections and SEC, but I will say we're just getting started. There will be more funds, there will be more capital. We're talking to a number of our peers at Blackstone and Apollo and others about doing the same thing, about making a pledge to kind of do that. And I think that those little ideas can turn into much, much bigger impact if you just build that mechanism that kind of drives that.
Thank you, Joel. And I think you're a shining light for much of this. But as we all know today, eventually your bank, your finance is going to be on your phone. And more of the world is digitized from this standpoint. So Josh, what will be the effect of the future of finance with this incoming administration on the future of digital finance?
Sure. Well, thank you, Mike. It's a real honor to be here with all of you. And Joel, I have to just bond with you here for a moment. I'm also I'm a single child of a single father, first to go to college, raised in a small apartment. My dad started his business when he was bankrupt with my first bonus. If we met each other at 10, we'd have no idea where this thing was. I pinch myself every day. So it just underscores how important opportunity is. I think when you think of future finance, I'll limit my comments primarily to kind of consumer finance, Mike. With the incoming administration is committed to deploying and making available recent innovations in financial technology and in transaction and payments mechanisms. And all of these are designed really to lower transaction costs, lower barriers, and ease access. There are risks, but they're intent on doing it. So when we think about the policies that we've heard about with the incoming administration, everyone kind of knows crypto. So they are, and that's the least important of the two, but they are certainly committed to securitizing cryptocurrency assets, making it easier and cheaper and quicker for people to invest in them, store value in them, and sell them if they need to. The far more important innovation that's going to come is the regulations that permit the ability to transact and empower blockchain technology. So right now, 180 million Americans a year use things like Venmo to make peer-to-peer payments. The rest use credit cards or send cash. That number is going to go up dramatically. But in the coming years, you're going to be able to transact on something called the blockchain. So you'll go into a store to buy a pair of pants, say the pants cost $50. You will have put your savings in a particular blockchain. Let's say you would deposit $1,000 there, backed by a US stablecoin with an underlying US Treasury bond. So when you buy those pants for $50, you're really going to be giving the vendor 5% of 1,000 par value of an underlying US Treasury bond. You've got to fractionalize them completely. Well, what does that mean? That means you'll be able to transact instantaneously with close to zero fees, with close to zero fraud. And that should lower transaction expenses for everybody. And it's going to put a lot of pressure on credit card fees and on banking fees, which is good for society. So our large institutions will have to innovate along with everybody else. The last two things I'd say in terms of practical felt impact, the FICO score that we've all encountered throughout our lives, I don't think there's anyone in this room, including those up here, who have at some point in their lives looked at their FICO score and said, what the heck? It wasn't, we had felt misjudged by it. This new form of payment mechanism, the digitization of finance and payments, will enable new forms of credit scoring. So you won't be beholden to one company's view of what your creditworthiness is. And that's good for everybody. And I think, 100%. And I feel the same way, and the same thing will occur in insurance markets as well. So that you'll be insurable, the underwriters will be more, they'll be more available, they'll be more instantaneous, and they'll have better information. That's where this all goes.
Thanks. And so let's talk about these transaction costs, all these costs that you feel are hidden. So there's tens of billions of dollars that people working here, whether they're from the Philippines, a nurse or something, that they would remit back to their own countries. And many years ago, 10 to 15% was taken out. Today, that's moving towards zero cost to move money. Your new initiatives like Earned In, if you get paid and you're living paycheck to paycheck, but you get paid every 2 weeks, there are these new things being launched with employers, et cetera, Walmart and many, where you can borrow at a zero interest rate every day you work. So they'll advance your pay like you were being paid every day. No need to go to a pawnbroker, a loan shark, or something for money. When I first went to Wall Street, it cost 1% to buy or sell a stock. Today, it's close to zero. If you want a mortgage, what you can get online, etc. And so the goals when I went to Wall Street so many years ago in the late 60s were to create more points of light. You didn't want 10 people to decide who could get money and who couldn't get money, and they didn't want young companies or minorities to have access to capital become competitors. Today, there's tens of thousands. So the suppression of cost and making it easier is what Joel really focused on. Now, Ray, I always used to think when I financed Reg Lewis back there almost 40 years ago that he was the Jackie Robinson of finance, okay? Yes, we committed $1 billion, and yes, you could be an African-American in America, and you didn't have to sell, you could buy. But after coming to the conference and our relationship today, I think people in finance, Ray, look at you as the Jackie Robinson of finance. So we know we're going to be moving increasingly digital. We know your banks. There's a lot of benefits of it, Ray. Kenya was one of the first countries in the world to pay people on your phone. The first reaction of the people that got paid is they thought they got a 20% raise. Now, why did they think they got a 20% raise? Because the foreman was taking part of their pay, putting it in his pocket before it went to them. Now it's transparent. There isn't any separation between your pay and what you're supposed to get paid. But there's a lot of issues to be addressed. If I have $250,000 in a bank account, I'm insured by the US government after the Depression and what occurred. What happens to your money if it's sitting online in some account that you have? As finance becomes increasingly digital, Ray, how do you regulate it? Who monitors it? How do we address it? How do we protect it?
So first of all, Mike, thank you for your generous comments. It cannot be overstated, the impact that Mike Milken has had in the world of finance. And I say that not only globally or nationally, but I say that locally, if it can be said locally, in the example of Reginald Lewis, on whose shoulders anybody who's black in the world of finance stand. So let me be bright, clear, and unequivocal. No Mike Milken, no Reg Lewis, no Ray McGuire. And so in a world that is what's been described here in a digital world, which we referenced in the first conversation, is one where access to capital will become much more available. The things which the community has not had access to, like investing in the stock market and being able to do this in a way to create scores, FICO scores, so that you can go from being a renter to a homeowner. Access to opportunity going forward exists today. It's going to exist in a much larger scale going forward. And much of that, which we've talked about here, the transfer of dollars, not only Venmo, Zelle within the US, but the ability to do what Western Union used to do. We had to go to the Western Union shop to make sure that you could make a $20 wire transfer, or go to the loan person in the neighborhood, the payday lenders, in order to get access to dollars. That's going to go away. Access is going to increase. The question then becomes, today your dollars in a financial institution are guaranteed up to $250,000. So if something happened in a financial transaction, at least you have a place to where you can appeal. The question that we'll have to address, to which today we're working on an answer, but we don't have an answer, is what happens if you're on your phone and you are in Bitcoin or blockchain technology and your phone gets compromised? What happens if you're an older citizen and you are on your phone and you try to transact and your phone gets compromised? Your dollars get wiped out. To whom do you appeal? And so as we go through, on the one hand, there's tremendous benefit. On the other hand, there's tremendous risk. And so the appeal that we have to make is to the public officials who are the ones who are in many ways the arbiter to our daily lives, those leading government officials whom we put in office, to make certain that as this technology advances, that they have us at the center of how they're thinking about how it gets regulated, how we get protected, especially how this community gets protected. Because as we know, they got a whole bunch of hustlers out there. And the hustlers know exactly how to take advantage. And moving forward, we got to be mindful of the hustlers as well as mindful of the opportunity. The payday lenders will go by the wayside, but there's going to be others who are digitally savvy who can take advantage. And so while there are going to be advances, which are material, which are significant going forward, we also need to be mindful of the risk, Mike.
Thank you, Ray. So important. So one of the things that's occurred and we fought for over the last 55 years has been this concept of securitization. And why is securitization so important? One, it spreads risk. So I'm not making just your mortgage loan. I'm buying a package of 1,000 or 10,000 mortgage loans. And the other thing securitization brings is you can't discriminate if you don't know whose loan you own. And so once they're pooled and put in a group, whether it's your auto loan, whether it's your mortgage loan, whether it's your car loan, that loan, the people that buy those loans doesn't necessarily know your name or the person they lent money to. They're looking at it as a package of loans in an area. Now, the increase, and probably the fastest growing part of Ares, has been in the asset-based lending. Joel, let's talk a little bit about how diverse this is as we find out different financial structures to meet the needs of society, building, et cetera. Talk about that growth.
Yeah, I mean, what you've seen is that everything we do in alternative credit or asset-based credit is a portfolio, and it's a portfolio of loans, leases, and receivables. And all of those have contractual cash flows. So everybody in this room here today touches what we do every day. It's estimated, as large as the direct lending market is, about $4 trillion. The asset-based finance world is over $30 trillion. So about the size of the US economy across that, and that's just US and Europe. And the reason it's so big is every time you stream something on Netflix, it creates a contractual cash flow. Every time you're doing something on Spotify, every time you leave, if you own a house, your car, all of those things are creating these loans, leases, and receivables and these contractual cash flows.
Let me just ask a question.
Yes, sure.
For those of us who are less familiar, what is asset-based financing?
So asset-based it's the underlying loans, leases, and receivables. So every time those assets are created that Mike's talking about, whether in the securitization market or outside of the securitization market, when you're taking that loan, that is getting bundled into a larger portfolio, whether it's on a house, whether it's on an equipment lease for a corporate, whether it's on a consumer loan, as you were talking about on some of the buy here, pay and others. And if you look at that market is huge. If you think about what's the multiplier effect, the multiplier effect is simple. Money makes the world go round. Credit makes money go round.
Okay, Joel, let's repeat that because it's extremely important that we discuss why does credit make the world go round?
Every asset in the world is valued by credit. If you think of private equity, it's driven by credit. If you think of your house and the ability with regards to your home price, it's availability of credit. If you think of the price of your car and the value of that car, it's available by credit. Even sovereign and countries are driven by credit and their ability to get access to credit. And it's interesting, I'm a history buff a lot like Mike, not to the same degree. But if you go back in 10,000 years of written history, really the last few years, Medici and others created what you guys both started at in the bank and I started at Citibank, which is banks. And the money multiplier that always drove credit was banks. And that really changed, as Mike mentioned, in the 70s with securitization, and really didn't get going until Mike and others of the foundations in the 80s. And the reason it's important is if you look at the market today, there's not a pillar. It's not just banks. If you look at the market today, there's 5 pillars. You've got banks, you've got securitization market, you've got insurance, you've got private credit, and then I throw pensions and sovereign wealth into their own category because it's different pools. And all of those 5 pillars, if you think about systematic risk and other things, 4 of them are matching to their underlying liabilities. They're structured in a form that works and continues to grow and can continue to expand and continue to grow the valuations. One doesn't. It's banks, because you're borrowing short-term and you're lending out long-term. And so when you think of the future of finance, you think of that ability to rise up, you think of that ability to lift, it all starts with credit. Because that availability to credit, that ability to lift that, and you see nothing more than in asset base. The reason it's the fastest growing is it's the biggest market. And this market is no longer dominated by just 1 or 2 pillars. It's now touching every one of those pillars. As you see the growth on insurance with regards to annuity markets, as you see the growth across private credit on some of the illiquid side, as you see the growth across the sovereign wealth and pension funds. And we both compete and we partner with each other. So when you think of the 3 things that really drive prosperity, in my mind it's simple. You have to have your health, you have to have an education, and you have to have an opportunity. And the opportunity really only comes from capitalism and that ability to lift up. And if you think of the core of what capitalism is, it's credit. It's the thing that drives everything that drives this market. It's something you figured out, obviously, 50 plus years ago, but it's misunderstood. And when you talk about things like credit, it's why financial literacy is so important. It's because if you don't understand credit, you have no shot to succeed in this world. Your ability to look at a P&L, your ability to look at budgets, your ability to take a home loan, your ability to grow your business are all dependent on that function. So the democratization of credit has already started to occur because it's no longer held in some building in the middle of nowhere with, in New York with regards to just banks where we all started our careers. It has now been democratized across those 5 pillars and continues to grow and continues to increase the access.
So it was almost 60 years ago at the Watts riots that I met this young African-American man as we watched the building burn down that he worked in. And when he woke up in the morning, he had a family, he had no savings, and he had no job. Now, he did not participate, but he did not stop it. And he told me that next day that his parents, his father particularly, could never own a business because of the color of his skin. And his conclusion in the early 30s is that he would never be able to borrow to start a business. Now, this was a ridiculous result of not understanding value and the potential of people. And it caused me to change my major and go back and study, as Joel said, credit in '69. In '65, I began, and in '69, we completed the initiation. But this democratization of capital takes many forms. And as Joel said, it took securitization. So you have an idea of creating a little store, whatever it might be, a fast food restaurant, but you don't have that much capital, so you're going to start franchising your idea once it works. You now can sell your franchise fees to Joel and others who will securitize that. So it eliminates and provides access with the democratization of capital. As Joel said, there are tens of thousands of people you don't know who could decide they're willing to give you capital to fulfill your objectives, whatever they might be. And so, Josh, you've talked about the reduction of transaction cost, the interest rates coming down because of competition, not having to pay fees. But are there risks? We understand the benefits, and Ray's raised some of them, but what are the risks you see to consumers by this digitization of finance?
Well, I think Ray's comments really started to nail it when you talked about the hustle, right? There's always a hustle. Right now, for years it was payday lenders in neighborhoods. There's always a hustle. So there's a hustle here too. that we have to watch out for. So we talked about maybe using a US stable coin to go in and buy a pair of pants, right? But let's say you're a 20-year-old or a 25-year-old and you're at a restaurant. You bought your meal for 20 bucks, you go up to the bar and you're getting a beer. Maybe it's your second one. And since we're in Atlanta, I'll say you look up and you see the Falcons on TV.
Rise up.
Right. And just as you're making your payment with your payment app, right, which you're now going to be using, an ad pops up and says, do you like your Falcons? Are you loyal to them? Rise up. You click yes. And the next one says, well, are you man enough to lay a wager on it, at these odds, for the rest of the game? And I assure you that the odds of whoever's doing that, the odds they're giving you are not going to be the odds that you would get in a more formalized, regulated gambling environment. So last I checked, it's illegal for a bookie to walk into a bank and take bets when people cash their paychecks. So we need to make sure that the equivalent of that doesn't happen. We evolved to make these decisions slowly. If a tiger's chasing you, you can make a decision fast. But things like financial risk and what to buy, we didn't evolve to make those decisions in 30 seconds. And we've seen the same thing in social media, right? People get pleasure from making decisions fast and looking for affirmation. We need to make sure that that whole dopamine brain cycle doesn't get implemented in our new, vast, and probably for a while relatively unregulated payment system, so that people can be separated from their money quickly. So I agree 100% with Ray's concerns, and that's just one small example of how that sort of thing can happen.
Ray, today you sit at Lazard. We'd have been a lot better off had you sat in the mayor's office in New York City. What is it like with the level of people? We've been very focused at the Milken Institute in programs and internships for students that are going to historically black colleges. When I went to business school, maybe 5% of the class at most was women. Today, more than 50% of leading business school, law schools are women. What does the class look like at Lazard? How well are they prepared and educated today when you bring the young people in? And how diverse are they?
As we think about our world, there are three pillars, to adopt your analogy here, on which our firm, and any one of these firms, exists. That is strategy, clients, and talent. We've outlined a strategy. Peter Orzag, our CEO, has outlined a vision for 2030. And we are focused on, we know the clients are, we need to make sure that we got the best and brightest talent. Human capital, which you identified in one of your earlier, if not the earliest slide, is the most important component of that. And notwithstanding all the advances that we make in technology, it will never, ever displace experience and judgment. Experience and judgment, especially the judgment part of this, is that factor which distinguishes our firm from every other firm. In addition to the ability to develop relationships that are trusted relationships, which you can't breach, goes back to what Dr. King was saying, the human moral compass that we all need to apply. And as we apply that in the world of business, make certain that the talent that we onboard and the talent that we train has a North Star, because any breach of that has an impact on the brand. And so we are focused on identifying and training and recruiting the best talent and making certain that that talent engages in the firm and pushes the firm to realize the values for which they were attracted to the firm from the outset. What's important in any of these institutions, the most important is that leadership. Different than management, it's leadership. And as if each of us thinks about the experiences that we had on any team on which we have been involved, it is the leadership. It is the coach, whether or not the coach has got a vision of how we go about and compete within the realms of the rules of engagement, but make certain that we bring our A game to every match. Win or lose, but bring the A game to every match. And as we identify the talent, we're looking for the people who are best and the brightest. And we cannot in any way retreat from that standard. And each of us, as we've talked about our modest beginnings, has had to be able to go and compete and become amongst the best and the brightest in order for us to sit on this stage with you, Mike.
One thing to add to that is it can't end with opportunity. I think all three of us has been involved in this from the standpoint. We funded a program at Ares called Alt Finance, which gave $30 million across to HBCUs. And you need capital, you need opportunity, but you need mentoring. Because you need that mentoring to be able to do, and you guys have hired people out of Alt Finance and the Lazard, we've hired them into Ares, Milken Institute has hired them also. And I look at it as from the standpoint of there is a socioeconomic piece of this you can't ignore. I kind of came basically out of trailer trash, for lack of a better word. And if you think about that from the socioeconomic standpoint, I still remember when I got started at Citi and I got the opportunity, but I had an amazing mentor. And that mentor allowed me to say, hey, go out in, on your forks and knives and, how to act right in the right situations, because I had no clue. We didn't eat out. We didn't do any of that stuff growing up. And so you can have that opportunity. The thing I love about Alt Finance, and I think it needs to be weaved into all these programs, is the mentorship. Because that giving back, that mentorship, that allowing people to have that opportunity to learn from what you've learned across that to me is just as important as the capital and the opportunity.
So let me amplify this point and just go with the foundation of mentorship. Let me go one step further. It's sponsorship.
Yeah.
There are programs that aspire to mentorship, where the difference is really made is somebody who sponsors you, somebody who's prepared to commit their currency, whether or not it is some kind of social capital or economic capital. That currency gets committed. That's sponsorship. What Mike Milken did for Reg Lewis is sponsorship. What you're trying to accomplish here with Alt Finance, mentorship and sponsorship. The way that people advance is in the room where it happens. In the room where it happens. Do you ask the question? Do you ask the question? How's Pookie? How's Ray Ray? How's Shaniqua? How are they doing? I am told that they are best in class. We have a promotion coming up, and are they being considered in the promotion? And if not, tell me why. I'm looking at your compensation table, and you're telling me that they have outperformed. How are they being compensated relative to their peer group? Now, that's sponsorship and the ability to call across the industry to ask the question. If you're in the room, you can decide not to take on the opportunity, the responsibility to ask the question. But when you're in the room and you do take that on, then you get the humility of what that young man said when he was 21 years ago in this career. It ain't about me, it's about we and how we advance. And when we're in that room, do you ask the question? And that's sponsorship.
So we've looked at the future in many ways. And it's so interesting because we're here at a conference that uses the word hope. And for so many, hope is opportunity, mentorship, sponsorship. And if you saw Hamilton, he wanted to be in the room where it happened. And so we are in the room today where it's happening with a mission of financial literacy for all. So thank you for joining us today, panelists.
Thank you.
This is Governor Brian Kemp. On behalf of the state of Georgia, I want to welcome you to Atlanta for your 10th annual meeting. As the #1 state for business, we have prioritized creating jobs and opportunity for all Georgians. Whether that meant cutting red tape to ease the burden on entrepreneurs and small business owners, or returning billions in tax dollars to the hardworking people of our state, we have taken action to support Georgians. I know you share that commitment to opening doors for all, a commitment that will help inspire future generations and connect our people with pathways to success. I hope you leave here with a renewed dedication to promoting growth and opportunity for all. Enjoy the meeting, and God bless.
Everyone who's been out here so far, are you having a good time? Learning a lot? It's almost like, who wants it to end? We don't want it to end. Well, the good thing is there's so much more great stuff coming up. I hope that all of the incredible guests are getting to you the way they are to me. They're changing lives. Operation Hope is changing lives for thousands of people each year. And next, we are honored to have the former U.S. Congressman, the former Director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and former White House Chief of Staff, the current co-chair of ACTM, the Honorable Mick Mullaney. Yes, he is joined by Marian Phillips of the U.S. News and World Report and the co-chair of the Hope Global Forums. Please give it up for the legendary Ambassador Andrew Young.
Where's Andrew? Here he comes. By there?
Very good.
Good to see you. Thanks for doing this.
You got it?
Okay.
Come on, young man.
Hello.
Very good.
It's good to see you again.
What is this, afternoon? No, it's good morning. We're glad to be here
Still
with
morning?
Mick. Yeah, it's still morning. I had to check too.
Okay.
We're glad to be here with Ambassador Young and Mick. And let's just talk a little bit about the future of economics and the economy related to growth. Both of you served in Congress. Both of you have had high-level administrative and executive roles. And so the first question for both of you is very simple. What's going on and what's the state of the economy?
The economy is at risk. It's doing well. I think it's doing better than I think a lot of us expected. Inflation is coming down. I think it's going well. The risk, however, is the debt. There's no question about it. If I could wave a magic wand and do one thing here today, though, it would be I'm really excited about what the president's doing with Elon Musk. I know it sounds crazy. The young people I talk to, the entrepreneurs, the regulatory environment in this country right now is holding them back. Young people have a desire to create, a desire to grow, a desire to be adventuresome. And I can't tell you the number of them have come to me and say, look, it's just too hard to start a small business. I'm not talking about big tech firms. I'm talking about folks with billions of dollars. I'm talking about folks that want to open a restaurant or start a small business. And if we can fix the regulatory environment, I think that's one of the best things we would be able to do. We can talk about the $36 trillion debt another time because it's just too depressing this close to Christmas, and focus on things we can actually do between now and, say, the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think you're right when you consider that 90% of our businesses are small businesses. Ambassador Young, what's the state of the economy?
Well, I think it's very, very good.
Yeah.
And but I'm looking from Atlanta. And one thing about Atlanta, but it's probably true of a lot of cities, that we go back to Maynard Jackson and the airport. And that airport now is the busiest in the world. We didn't use any government money in it. We went to Wall Street and bought tax-exempt municipal bonds. I think it's about $17 billion that we've put into it, but no city money, no state money, no federal money. It's all operated on Wall Street, and the city in cooperation with whatever airlines happen to be growing. It's mostly Delta now because Delta was around when Eastern went under, and they bought up all the gates that Eastern had. And so we have,
I mean, if Georgia Tech is one offset point behind Georgia, that might mean we have the two best football teams in the country at the collegiate level. I'm saying that I look at things from here because this is where we have the controls. And the federal environment is necessarily good, and if we can slow down or stop some of these wars and put money into development rather than into destruction, and I think that that's liable to happen. I always, let me be honest, and I have been around here.
Were you lying to us just now, or?
Oh, I might have been. And I might have been because I tell you what my hopes and dreams are. And they're always for the best. But having been a mayor and a congressman, I know, what is it, snafu? Remember that term?
I know what it means, yes. We can't say it on stage, but yes.
But everybody, ask your neighbor what snafu stands for. And,
Just don't say it out loud.
And but that's always with us. We are human beings, and the news media makes us good today and bad tomorrow. But it depends on what they feel somebody's mood is. The truth of it is, I'm 92 and a half years old. And I was born poor and didn't know I was poor.
Yeah.
And it didn't ever bother me that I was poor because everybody around me was poor. And it wasn't just black people poor. I was Irish on one corner. The Nazi party was on the second corner, the Italian bar on the third corner, and a Chevrolet dealership around the fourth corner. In New Orleans, Louisiana, in 1932, when Franklin Roosevelt became president. And one of the first things I remember is him saying, when the war broke out with Japan after Pearl Harbor, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And that's a kind of American, it's not optimism, it's faith. And it was so segregated, I couldn't go to a movie without climbing up in a balcony, but I never felt that was, I never worried about it. If I wanted to see the movie, I climbed up to see it. If I didn't want to see it, I didn't bother. And it's, you change what you can change, and you live with what you can't change, and God helps you to know the difference. You know, there are lots of things that we have changed in my lifetime that I never thought we could have changed.
I call that generational opportunity, where we went from climbing up into the balcony to see the movie to the ability to be in front and behind the camera. But you know, Mick, you talked about small businesses. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
How do we, when we create a small business, we're giving generational opportunity as well as generational wealth, which creates stronger communities when you look at the social determinants of health. You've got to look at the community from an economic perspective. So from that mindset, let's not discuss the debt because we will be here a while.
Yeah.
But when we start looking at the debt, when we start looking at low birth rate, when we start looking at fewer students going to college.
The challenges you face?
There we go.
No.
How do we manage that?
But where are you? There are more kids going to college in Georgia than ever before. 60% of Atlanta's population has been to college. That is phenomenal. And that came out of the Hope Scholarship.
Yep.
And the Hope Scholarship came from a bunch of brothers on the street running numbers. And I voted for the Hope Scholarship in the lottery because my grandmama liked to play the numbers. And I didn't play the numbers, but my grandmama looked for the numbers man every day. And so if my grandmama did it, it must be all right. And sure enough, Granny was right. We got 60% of our population with college education. And no other city in the world can probably say that.
And that helps.
And that's, you all talked to the public school people just a little while ago. They're the ones that are responsible for it. It's not the universities. They're reaping the benefit now. But it was the kindergarten teachers and the first grade teachers. My wife is now at the funeral of a young man that she taught when he was in 4th grade. That's a healthcare problem, though. That's not a school problem.
Right.
And so it's probably, I don't know that there's a better place, and I think I've been to about 152 countries with chasing the Olympics and chasing after every place Carter sent me. And there isn't any place I'd want to go or be a part of but the United States of America.
Oh, that is
He's
so true.
absolutely right.
Go ahead.
He's absolutely right. There's no question about it. But there is a challenge out there that I don't think we recognize. And it's the reason I come to this every single year, and I appreciate John inviting me to come here so I can say this one thing, which is that the younger people are struggling to do this. The younger people are struggling to talk to people that they don't agree with, that they are not aligned with politically. The two most depressing things I've seen, Frank Luntz was here the other night, and Frank gave a speech. I teach classes with Frank. I talked to a young woman after class one day. She said she would never be friends with somebody she didn't agree with politically. I was in a presentation then the next night where someone said they thought that this particular group in Los Angeles, the police department, was racist. And that chief of police, an African American, was there and laid out all of the case for why what the kid thought was right was wrong. The facts were wrong. And the kid said, I don't care about the facts. I know they're racist.
So
if people cannot talk to folks they disagree with.
No, but who is not racist?
The point.
Race, I'm including me and you. That another way of looking at racism is ethnocentrism. That you're ethnically biased toward people that look like you.
True, but you have to be able to talk to those folks. You and I have had a nice chat.
I'm saying, yeah, and but I grew up talking to everybody.
Yes.
And you especially want to seek out people that you disagree with because you might learn something.
And the younger people today don't see that.
And they don't see that, and I want to throw it back at my industry. Because in the media, many people go to the media that they confirm their beliefs.
Yes.
Not to inform their beliefs.
Right.
Which hinders the ability to have the conversation, a civil conversation.
And the ability to get facts that
Correct.
allow you to change your mind and change your opinion.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that bothered me the last year, maybe more than anything else, is I think one of the best things that ever happened to this city was the Olympic Games.
Okay.
And I realized the closer we got to the election, that most of the people who were on the Atlanta Olympic Committee with me were not going to vote the same way I would vote.
Yeah.
And that was a real struggle for me. Because these are people that, well, the people who put together the airport.
Right.
Said, we didn't agree. In fact, one of the first conversations I had with the guy who was then the head of Delta was I said, Atlanta's going to have an international airport. And he said, not in my term. He said, we are a regional airline with a few national routes. We will probably never go international as long as I'm around. And I said to myself, you ain't going to be around long. But putting it closer to home, I got the same message from a wonderful guy who got Georgia State started. But Georgia State was a 400-person business school, and I talked to him about dormitories so that we could expand. He said, as long as I'm here, Georgia State will be a night school for people who work in Atlanta to get graduate degrees, and we will never have any dormitories. we now have 52,000 citizens.
Wow.
In dormitories.
Wow.
You know, and I thought that, well, you know, Georgia Tech is the conservative school in town in many ways. And Georgia Tech now has 53,000 students.
Wow.
And they have more women engineers than any school in the country, more Hispanic engineers, and more black engineers are produced at Georgia Tech. And it's not what we're used to.
Are they teaching people to talk to each other? That's what worries me.
Probably not yet.
Yeah.
But they get drunk together.
They get drunk together, okay.
They cheer together at the football game.
They do,
and
but they don't get drunk together, and that's my concern.
Yeah,
is that
probably,
people are self-selecting for people that agree with them all of the time.
Yeah.
And how are you going to solve the challenges that we don't get a chance to talk about today? How do you solve Social Security, the debt, stop the wars, if you can't even sit down across the table from somebody and even talk to somebody that doesn't vote like you? That's what worries me.
Well, I was in the generation before the movement. And I was probably, I mean, I didn't even carry an NAACP card in 1947 at Howard University. And I mean, I was just trying to get my degree and get out of there, you know. But then once I get out, I come here, and they put me in a voter registration drive. And from then on, I was led, but I was a Republican then too. No, and because all of the judges that made the decisions that were supporting us in the civil rights movement were appointed by President Eisenhower. And the Democratic Party prohibited blacks to be members till 1949. And I'm saying that I go into all of this bad history because we are young enough and yet old enough to realize that all of that is now behind us, and we're looking at a new world, and we're anxious about it.
So I appreciate that comment, and I think you're speaking to the fact, both of you are speaking to the fact of that we need to understand our past and how we did work together and how we can work together in the future. Mick, if you would close us out on what you think. I think the ambassador gave us a great understanding of working, what it took to get to this far. The colleges, the airport, vision. Close us out on what do you think it will take.
I want to have the last word, though.
No, he's going to get the last word. Everybody knows you're getting the last. So I'm going to give a short answer.
But see, we already knew that. That's why we're closing 10 minutes early.
People ask me, why do you go down to John O'Brien's thing? I said, mostly so I could just sit and chat with Ambassador Young. We talked about this backstage. Look, we have to figure out a way. You accomplished so much because you were able to put your differences aside. If you and I disagreed 90% of the time, you are the kind of person that would focus on the 10% of the stuff that we can work together on.
And that's what life is.
It is, and I'm just hopeful. I'm seeing, partly because of the media, partly because many of us, including myself, are probably not the best parents we could probably be. We are not encouraging the next generation to do that. And people say, what do you worry about? The reason I worry about that is because we are not going to solve all of our problems before he dies, before I die, before you die. That we are going to leave problems to the next generation. There's no question about it. But are we leaving them the ability to resolve and solve those problems? That's the biggest challenge I think we face. And now we'll take the next 15 minutes listening to the ambassador close.
You and I got a flight, so he has 7 minutes.
Well, you know, I ended up getting hooked up with Martin Luther King. And I was at a voter registration workshop when John Kennedy was killed. And I thought it was the end of the world. And it was a bunch of folk from South Carolina and Georgia, and mostly older black people who everybody just instinctively fell down on their knees and started praying. And it was one of them old-fashioned moaning and groaning prayers. And I thought that this was the end of the world. But 2 years later, almost everything we were planning for, Lyndon Johnson was working on. And I thought after we were working on South Africa, and when Ronald Reagan was elected, it put President Carter out. But before he left, Ronald Reagan signed the legislation that started the boycott that helped to get Nelson Mandela out of jail. And that's why I put my faith in democracy. And it's a biblical concept of democracy. Dr. King used to say over and over again, truth crushed to earth will rise again. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways the future, and behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadows, keeping watch above his own. And Ralph Abernathy used to say all the time, I don't know what the future may hold, but I don't care, because I know who holds the future. It's been in every part. Ray Charles, blind man, but he picked the third verse out of America the Beautiful. Oh, beautiful, for heroes have already proved in liberating strife, who more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life. America, America, may God thy gold refine, till all success be nobleness and every gain divine. That's a country, that's a historic vision that we can all live with.
Yeah.
Because I don't care what we think is going to happen, I can guarantee you're wrong. Everybody from me and you to Elon Musk is playing God cheap. They don't know. And, but we will know. And we will hopefully find out together and celebrate it peacefully, not only within these United States, but we'll find a way to include some kind of way of living with China and some kind of way of living with Russia. We took 3,000 people from Atlanta to Soviet Georgia because Russia had 16 votes on the Olympic Committee and Africa had 19. So we figured if we could get Africa and Russia together. But see, Ted Turner had taken the Goodwill Games to Russia from CNN. And so they welcomed us. And we got all of the boats from Russia. We got all the boats from Africa. And we picked up boats from just about everywhere else in the world because we brought people here and we let them see how it is that we live together, as different as we are, as crazy as we are, as ignorant as we can be, and as prejudiced as we are. But somehow, we've made it work. And the other thing I want us to remember that when President Obama sang, what is it?
Amazing Grace.
Amazing Grace. They said on the television, this was the old Negro spiritual. Bullshit. Amazing Grace was written by a slave trader, a white slave trader who was selling black folk on a ship named the Good Ship Jesus. And when he got converted, he wrote Amazing Grace, and all of us sing Amazing Grace hoping we're going to get into heaven too. And it's by the grace of God and the mercy of God that this country achieves and arrives at its greatness, at its vision. And it comes from people like us who,
That's a wonderful Christmas message. Thank you for that.
Dr. King used
So,
to say
Ambassador, thank
that
you.
we ain't what we ought to be. We ain't what we're gonna be. But
So
thank God we ain't what we was.
So true. And on that note, thank you for listening to us, and we hope that you heard something that will encourage you and to move this country forward. Our leader.
Look at this.
Hey everybody, you enjoying this? We're bringing this home. Michael Milken is his plane delayed because he wants to make sure he's doing one more session. He's got to leave. Mick's got to leave. Mick doesn't have a plane, but he's got to leave. But hold on. By the way, there are some politicians, as patient as I am, as open-minded as I am, there are some people that drive me out of my mind, frustrate me to no bejeebers. Mick Mulvaney's not one of them. Mick is a good man. If I have somebody on this stage, it's not by accident. It's intentional. When was the last time since the presidential election that you saw a prominent Republican and a prominent Democrat on stage together? My guess is never. This was intentional, and wasn't this beautiful?
Thank you. Thank you. Merry Christmas. It's good to see you. It's a real treat. It's a real treat.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Privilege to be here.
Okay.
I'm gonna run to the airport.
All right.
We'll see you.
Please.
Delta will get you on time.
He's just a treasure. He's fantastic. You ready?
Yeah.
Let's do it. Thanks, buddy. Merry Christmas.
Good. Thanks.
Financial well-being of the city of Birmingham, financial well-being of our citizens, and even personally, the financial well-being for me as a husband and a father. Now, let's talk about what this financial literacy means. It means the ability to understand finances, but what it really means is for you to be aware. I think awareness is extremely important. Understanding what financial literacy means makes your life better. On a personal note, you know, growing up in a city like Birmingham and growing up in the neighborhoods I lived in my own family personal experience, no one taught me financial literacy. I wonder if what I know now as an adult, if I knew then as a child, would my finances be better? The answer is yes. But in addition to that, even as an adult, you can't blame what you didn't know as a child for decisions you make now. So putting in the work to become financial literate has to be an intentional thing. Being an employee with 3,000 plus employees, look, it does not matter the department our employees in. They all have their own lives outside of their job. And what I know is that what matters and happens at home affects what happens at work. So it's important that the city of Birmingham be in a position to empower our employees to become financial literate. And then I would say overall, as mayor serving this city with 200,000 residents, one of the blackest cities in America, with the unfortunate extreme form of concentrated poverty, we have to be so intentional in municipal government about creating a platform, advertising, communicating, and letting our residents know there are so many opportunities for them to become financial literate. What drew me to Operation Hope is very simple. Operation Hope for the last 32 years is one of the few organizations that is intentional about offering financial counseling, financial advisement to everyday Americans. A city like Birmingham has to partner with an organization like Operation Hope, because Operation Hope is intentional about its partnerships of leveling the playing field and being in a position to offer resources to not only municipalities, but the communities as well as the employees that administration and that employer municipal government serves. In our case, our relationship with Operation Hope has been one that has changed lives for our employees, which therefore changes the community, because these same employees, our employees, live in community. And if they can make their home better, trust me, it makes their community better. So I'm grateful to Operation Hope. I'm grateful to the team. I'm grateful for the partnership, relationship as well as the intentional thought process behind partnering with the City of Birmingham.
All right. So I know you're having a good time and the hits just keep coming because we are very excited to bring you the next conversation with some of the world's leading experts. Our next guests are going to have a conversation on something that impacts us each and every day. So please help me welcome to the stage the Chief Medical Correspondent for CNN, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, the President and CEO of Morehouse School of Medicine, Dr. Valerie Montgomery Rice, Chief Science Officer and Medical Director at the Marcus Foundation, Dr. Jonathan Simmons, and returning to the stage, Mr. Michael Milken.
So for the last 3 days, you've been warming up for this panel. So we all think of our health and quality of life, length of life, in so many ways. And when we talk about the most important asset, and that is the potential of people, there's 2 ways to increase your human capital. One is education, and the second is your health, longer, healthier lives. And what people do not realize is the importance of what has gone on. And so why every life is precious. When you make an argument, and 25, 35 years ago, we tried to convince the US government to double the National Institutes of Health budget. We brought an economic argument to them. The elimination of cancer as a cause of death, 1 in 2 men get cancer, 1 in 3 women, was worth $50 trillion to the US economy when the entire economy was $17 trillion. And so in economic terms, when you look at it, over the last 2 centuries, more than 50% of all economic growth can be traced to advances in public health and medical research. 4 million years of evolution, we increased average lifespan by 11 years. In the last 120 years, we've increased it by 41 years. And there are countries in Africa, in 1 generation, you're going to double life expectancy. So there is no correlation between income and cost and outcome. This is a chart that shows you life expectancy. And I know when I was diagnosed with cancer 30 some odd years ago, I wanted to figure out maybe I should move to the places you live the longest. But you can see here, Costa Rica in this hemisphere, if you're a man, you have the longest life expectancy if you're living in Costa Rica. And you can see down at the end what US life expectancy is and the GDP. So wealth is not correlated here with life expectancy. And let's look at medical, how much we spent per person on medical. You can see once again how the US is spending dramatically more on medical. The next big challenge we have is, should your zip code determine your life expectancy? So here's 3 data points for you. As you travel from Manhattan and Midtown to the South Bronx, this trip reduces life expectancy by 10 years, 6 months for every minute on the train. If you're in Baltimore in the inner city, a man's life expectancy is 63. In the suburbs, it's 83, 20 years of difference. And in Chicago, if you're on the west side, between the Loop and Michigan Avenue, it's 16 years. So unfortunately, today, life expectancy has a lot, but there's something changing. And what's dramatically changing here is the cost of data, analysis, and sequencing of the human genome. So the first sequencing of the human genome took 10 years, $3 billion. Today, measured in hours and a few $100s due to the drop. So we can sequence who you are, we can sequence your microbiome, how your genes are expressed, and we can sequence your activities in terms of what has caused your disease or your mutations. It is projected today that AI market in healthcare is going to grow dramatically, 33% a year in the future. And we cannot forget the important role vaccines have played in the extension of our life today. And lastly, with the sequencing of the human genome now, we now fully understand what happens when you eat different foods. And I have subjected Jonathan to this for a long time, but basically that the pharmacy of the future is going to look like this. Now, where does breakthroughs come from? Many of them come from philanthropies. It's a very small percent, but this is your venture capital. 5 of the 10 largest foundations in the world are now medical philanthropies. The largest foundation in the world is Novo Nordisk. And yes, we've documented all this for you in a book, which we have, if you're interested, called Faster Cures. But let's start with, just because we know something in science, how does it get to your clinician? How does it get to your doctor? And under Jonathan's leadership at the Prostate Cancer Foundation at the time, we eventually acquired a company called Uro Today, which was the leading source of knowledge for people in the field of urology if you're a doctor or a patient. But the ultimate leading source of knowledge is a person that brings it to you on a company I was honored to finance many years ago called CNN. And so your insight to the world and who is educating the world and where we're going in science and where we're going in AI and how it's going to change, which plays an enormous, important role. Sanjay, how do you educate the world when science is moving so fast and the use of AI, not to be scared of new technologies, willing to accept new technologies? What do you think about as you're about to go on that show? And what do you think they're thinking about when you're speaking?
Thank you for that question, and thank you for this panel. That's fantastic. I always learn so much from you, Mike, so thank you, and just honored to share this stage with Dr. Rice and Dr. Simmons as well, so thank you. Humility, I think, is one of the things that I'm thinking about primarily when I'm about to go on television and talk about a topic. I think one thing that people sometimes forget is that medicine and public health, we live in a probabilistic world. Medicine and public health isn't a hard science in the way that 2 + 2 = 4, and I can tell you that with absolute confidence. We live in a probabilistic world, so people want to see black and white where they should rightly see gray. And I think I lean into that. Uncertainty, I think, is uncomfortable for people sometimes, but making sure that I understand something well enough to explain it. A lot of times I practice with my teenage girls ahead of time to make sure if they get it, then I feel like I'm doing a pretty good job. But I'll tell you one thing, there's a difference between, I think, information, which is plentiful, knowledge, I would put as sort of the second pillar, like actually contextualizing that information. And the third thing is wisdom. What do you do with all that? And I know you guys probably get some version of the same question whenever you see a patient, which is, okay, you've told me all the information, I'm more knowledgeable now, but what would you do if this were your mother, or if this were your daughter, or whoever? And I think it's a really fair question. So I always think about these things in the context of what would I do? So the thing about health, Mike, is that no one's immune from it. We're talking about Syria, we're talking about things around the world. People may feel like that's a over there sort of story. It doesn't affect me. This affects everybody. So I answer from my own vantage point, as a very informed person who does a lot of homework. But you got to be humble. I mean, I will just share with you that over the last 5 years, surveys have shown that scientists and doctors have increasingly been perceived as arrogant and dogmatic. And that's heartbreaking because I don't think anybody intends to be that way, but that is the perception. Humility, I think, can be an antidote to that.
Well, thank you. When I think about the dramatic changes today, world doesn't necessarily move at the speed it could. Many years ago, we were introduced to minimally invasive surgery. And the number one cancer that affects African American men is prostate cancer. They have 100% higher incidence and even a higher death rate than any other group in the world. And the number one surgery was a prostatectomy. But when you went to a cancer center, who was ahead of urology and oncology? It was normally a surgeon. Now you're talking to a surgeon who's had a career, and now they might be obsolete here by minimally invasive surgery. And they were able to delay almost 10 years in this country, the onset, because they said, well, how do we know the results 10 years from now are going to be the same? So you're in the hospital overnight rather than maybe for a week, less trauma, less blood, less problems. But technology was putting their careers at risk from that standpoint. So Dr. Rice, as the president and the first woman president and CEO of Morehouse School of Medicine, in many ways, you've been at the forefront of health equity, community health, advancements in healthcare. What innovative approaches at Morehouse are you taking to bridge the gap between health access, innovation, and to make sure the students today are current on what today's technology? If you grew up in China 40 years ago, you never studied diabetes. Maybe a fraction of 1% of the population in China had diabetes. But 20,000 fast food restaurants later, the most people with diabetes in the world are now in China. Increased sugar, increased carbs, animal protein in a world that lived on plant protein. And so they were not prepared, the people that went to medical school. How are you preparing tomorrow's medical leaders?
So again, thank you, Mike, for sharing your wisdom. And I always appreciate being on panel with other thought leaders. And I will tell you, Mike, if you went to medical school when we all went to medical school, the genome was just a double helix, right? The chromosome. We were not really understanding the impact of the genome. And what, 1990, 13 years to get it, and like you said, billions of dollars, right? And now you can do it for $200. So we've come a long way. But it starts with some basic principles. And Sanjay talked about one of them. How do we continue to educate and train the healthcare professionals that the world needs? It starts with humility. Understanding what we don't know, but what they need to know in order to be able to address the medical complexities. So we start with, first of all, embracing change. Artificial intelligence-driven data analytics is something that we have to embrace. We have to help our students to learn how to utilize ChatGPT in the classroom. We have to use simulation and virtual reality, because when you think about all of the medical ethical dilemmas or scenarios that students will be faced with once they become that provider, we can simulate that with people who don't look like them, who are not having the same life experiences, and challenge them to think about this in really a virtual reality world. And then the third part of it is really, really critical. We have to have them to learn in an interdisciplinary way. data scientists, engineers, medical information specialists, nurses, other people who are very much involved in creating new knowledge and translating it into science is really, really critical. And they have to learn in that environment. If we do just those three things, then we create more than just a provider who has cultural humility, but cultural competence, and also understand when they don't know enough to ask for additional resources and how to utilize those resources to make the best choices for the patient.
So give us a feeling, the students that graduate, those that might have graduated 5 years ago, what are their careers today? Are they going into family practice? Are they going into clinical research and care? Where are your students headquartered?
So Morehouse School of Medicine, we will celebrate our 50th anniversary next year. We are 50 years old. So we are one of the younger medical schools, but we were founded in the state of Georgia to diversify the healthcare workforce, work toward the elimination of health disparities, and increase access. We are very proud to say that we continue to see over 65% of our students choose to go back and practice in underserved communities, and also they are practicing in primary care and critical core specialties. Now, part of that is the way that we expose them and educate and train them, because we understand, we really do believe that the primary care provider is the quarterback. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they get to call all the plays, though, because we try to educate and train these young people to understand, depending on what the issue is or the challenges for the patient. Let's take COVID-19. When we were in the throes of this and there were people on ventilators, you needed that respiratory therapist sometimes to be the quarterback. And as a provider, we have to make sure that they understand when to step back and when to step forward, but to ensure that the care continues to be coordinated for the patient. And so we're very proud of the fact in the way we educate and train our providers that they are continuing to want to go back and practice in underserved communities. Now, one of the things that causes that to be successful, though, is that we recruit students from those communities. So we go into the small counties. We have 159 counties in the state of Georgia. We go into those small counties that are underserved, and we identify students in high school and in college and say, you too can be a doctor, you can be a nurse, you can be a research scientist, and we're going to give you a pathway in order to accomplish this.
So there are many programs that have occurred in the country today, particularly in education, that if you go to school and agree to work in these underserved communities, all your student loans will be written off over a period of time. Does this exist for the students at Morehead?
It does not exist fully in the state of Georgia.
So should we be asking and telling you for this
We should be
today?
telling you it should exist, right? Because I'll give you this example. About 8 years ago, under Governor Dill, we were able to receive $35 million of unrestricted dollars. We took $5 million of those dollars, and we looked at our residents who were graduating, and we said, if you go back and practice in an underserved community after you finish residency, we'll forgive $50,000 per year of your loans. We only had enough money to do so many, and we could give people $100,000. And we sent the money to the Department of Education and paid down their loans. So they didn't get it in their pockets. So we know that it was going to have this impact. When we look back now at that program, and we look 4 years after those persons received those dollars, we have a 93% retention rate. Those people stayed in those communities to practice. So we know that these type of programs work. It is a matter of investment. And believe me, there's no company that is going to open up their business or retain their employees to work at the highest level of productivity if they don't have health care and access to health care.
That is so true. So Jonathan, I met you just a few years ago 1993. You were a young, promising researcher, clinician at Johns Hopkins, and you announced you're going to go into the field of prostate cancer research, and people told you it would be career suicide. Luckily, I met you and told you it was the best decision you ever made in your life. You left Hopkins, came...
After marrying Plum.
Excuse me, after marrying Plum, the second best decision. You came here, you built the first real cancer center here at Emory. You were the first head of it. You led the Prostate Cancer Foundation worldwide for 14 years, even though you only promised to give me 5 initially.
That's true.
From that standpoint. And today, you run the medical philanthropies for Bernie Marcus, an individual that's made so much of a difference in this community today. Take us through for a moment how you viewed the world as a young clinician, scientist, promising at Hopkins, to building a cancer center here in Atlanta from the scratch, to running a worldwide disease-specific cancer organization, to now being in charge of what you support financially from the Bernie Marcus Foundation and where you allocate the funds. 4 different stops along the way. You're just a couple days older than you were when we first met. What was your perspective? If you could quickly, let's talk about these 4 points in your life.
So in 1992, I knew I wanted to be a doctor-scientist that worked on cancer and ended death and suffering from the cancer that struck down my high school baseball coach. There was no PSA test. So I dedicated my life, to being a doctor-scientist. Michael Milken was diagnosed, became like Eleanor Roosevelt for the March of Dimes, or what Michael J. Fox, learning from Mike, did for Parkinson's, which is make a major disease something to talk about and bring the whole community together. And that, you've heard about human capital, so some of my ideas actually got funded. And because I had bright young people at Hopkins, we made some progress in the field. But that was literally before the internet. And the Johns Hopkins faculty voted down email the first year because your email address was like 19 letters. So the Genome Project, the whole idea that we can see for major diseases with the genome a future where there's precision medicine, that the right patient gets the right treatment at the right time. And Dr. Gupta has done this incredible job of democratizing knowledge about this. Coming to Georgia, being recruited here to start a cancer center was a natural extension of wanting to make precision medicine a part of cancer care in the state of Georgia, where it was very fragmented. And then, obviously, to run the world's leading foundation in driving science for patients in prostate cancer in my area was an enormous opportunity. But I'd say it's all summarized in this book, and this was not prepared. Or he didn't know I was going to say it. The story really is very simple. This is a decade where we could reduce enormously death, suffering, improve access if we embraced, which this book's about, I think my whole career has been about, which is ultimately precision health span, using all the science, all the medical knowledge, so the right patient gets the right treatment or gets the right prevention and gets the right access at all times. That's what I would say the entire journey is about. It's really about delivering on the promise of the enormity of our science and embracing, to the points that have been made earlier, that all physicians in the future have to be lifelong learners. All nurses have to be lifelong learners. Our patients and families have to become lifelong learners, because all medical information doubled every 50 years. In 1950, this is called Coffey's Law. All the information in medicine, every disease, is doubling now every 11 months. everything that's known about every disease, there's twice as much information. And short of embracing basically a whole new kind of learning system for every patient, using actually artificial intelligence, machine learning, that's really going to be the way forward to democratize all the promise of science.
I think it's really interesting when you think about what is going to drive the future of health, sort of bouncing off what you're saying. I feel like the medical establishment is sort of inherently risk averse to things, and maybe for good reason. I mean, talking about people's well-being, you're not talking about Twitter, you're talking about taking care of patients. So I think how you look at technology and how we evolve, I think, is a little bit different. But also, it's very interesting when you look at AI in particular and sort of try and predict the impact that it'll have. There's not a lot of metaphors for it.
No.
But if you look at other medical technologies, like if you take a look at something like mammography, so since we're talking about cancer, mammography became sort of widespread adopted sort of in the mid-1970s, 1975-ish. Before that, there was a disparity in mortality between black women and white women. But when I look it up, it was around 7%. That's right. So it was there, but it was around 7%. You introduce widespread mammography, and overall cancer mortality comes down, and the disparities go up. So it's closer to 38% right now. And I think it's just a note. That was mammography, but anytime you introduce a new technology, if bias exists in our society, then things like AI can turbocharge that bias. And I think we just have to be, I think it's part of the reason we're a little bit risk averse. Mike, you talked about the Da Vinci. I think you were making a comment that maybe that should have been adopted sooner and more rapidly, and I can understand your perspective on that. I think that if you're dealing with an inherently risk-averse environment, you can start to understand why some of these technologies get adopted more slowly. Not that they don't get adopted. Right. I mean, we weren't emailing patients that long ago, but now, we slowly adopt these things.
Let's, over the years, I did a lot of Larry King shows on different subjects, including health. And Jonathan, you remember it was 95, and we wanted to change the paradigm of cancer treatments, et cetera. And so I had Lee Hood, and I had another doctor, and Larry told me, we need to bring a public figure, because the public often will trust the public figure more than they'll trust the world's leading doctors. So we brought General Schwarzkopf onto the show. And we were trying to get 3,000 families who had had 2 people in the family with prostate cancer just to come so we could study the families. And it had taken Johns Hopkins 12 years to get 800 families. So we had told Johns Hopkins, we're going to try this amazing new technology, television, and see if we can be more successful. And we received those 3,000 families within 1 week. 12 years to 1 week. And this is obviously before where we are with online today. And it was interesting, many people called in and said they were reporting for duty because of General Schwarzkopf. Maybe the best example I could ever give you occurred in polio. So here we're at the Centers of Disease Control in this city, and the polio vaccine was approved 3 years to 4 years after polio was declared an epidemic, but only 1% of teenagers had got vaccinated because they were concerned whether it was safe or not. And so Elvis Presley went on television on the Ed Sullivan Show at the time, got vaccinated, and 80% of all teenagers were vaccinated for the polio vaccine within 6 months. Now, we have a couple panelists here that were vaccinated on television. Could you please recognize yourself and talk to us? Why did you do it? What was your experience?
I think I made you do it.
Dr. Rice, why don't you
So
start?
I get this call from Sanjay, and he says that, you know, we really have to deal with this stigma. I said, I'm dealing with it as much as we can. We're doing drive-bys, we're doing all these type of things at the school, and he says, would you be willing to get the vaccine on television? And we both paused because we would be jumping the line. We're not as young as we look, but we're definitely not as old as we look also. And so we were concerned about that. But we then recognized that we represented a larger group, and perhaps it would deal with some of the concerns that people were having about the hesitancy. And we definitely did get a lot of positive feedback. Yeah. And we were happy to get our vaccines. Now, our family members couldn't get the vaccine. Remember, they were not old enough, and so they didn't like that, but they had to wait their turn. But we think it did make a difference in saying, okay, we believe in this science. And I think, Mike, we also have to really, really acknowledge Operation Warp Speed and what we were able to do during this time of a crisis to remove a lot of the red tape, to getting the scientific breakthroughs to be able to have a vaccine, and how taking that vaccine allows us to sit in this room today. And so we should not underestimate the power of will. And we can remove barriers when we all work more collectively together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are many new technologies available, but I just want to come back since we're talking about the future. So if you visited Earth from Mars and you only had a tricorder, so now you can sequence your genome. Mm-hmm. 2, we can sequence your microbiome now. How are your genes going to be expressed? Mm-hmm. And the fact as you change what you eat, your gut, your drink and stuff, it is starting to change how your genes are expressed. And so we have now see, as I mentioned to you in China, the minute we changed their diet, they changed their diet, a dramatic increase in hormone cancers, dramatic increase in diabetes. And lastly, we can sequence your mutation, so you're not being treated for breast cancer, you're being treated for your breast cancer, and then AI is matching these things up. But new technologies are viewed differently by different people. They're always skeptical. Today, I'm on the board of the Focus Ultrasound. Now, I'm old enough to be part of the Star Trek generation, not Star Wars generation. And they had a doctor named Bones, and he never operated. He just put this little device on your body and it zoomed back and forth, and you were well at the time. Well, today, Focus Ultrasound, the potential for non-invasive surgery in a field that you're very knowledgeable of. And I know you did a special on CNN with my college buddy, Neil Cassell, who founded it. How did you see this as a neurosurgeon and this new technology, since the first applications were first in your brain for tremors? How do you see that, and how do you explain that, boy, you might have a technology of surgery that's sound waves, and there's no cutting of your body?
It's remarkable. I mean, it is the manifestation, I think, of the science fiction shows you were watching as a kid. By the way, Neil told me that he tried to take you into the operating room once, and did you actually go in?
Yeah, we had this deal. I went to see him operate on monkeys at the University of Pennsylvania in their brain, and I fainted in the operating room watching this operation. Ever since then, I periodically send him mathematical models to pay him back. Yes, that is true. Maybe one of the first individuals to faint in an operating room.
Mm-hmm. Had you not fainted, you'd be a surgeon probably today, and the world would be very different. No, but let me just say, I think these types of technologies, the idea of using sound energy to manipulate the brain, in some ways. It's pretty remarkable. I think for a long time it was a pipe dream, but because they're able to not only really direct the sound energy to specific areas of the brain, but also image it real time using MRI scans, we can now do, without any kind of incision on the head, the same sorts of things that you'd normally do with a deep brain stimulator. And it works. I mean, they have evidence now, it's FDA approved for essential tremor, for certain types of movement disorders. Study just came out looking at the use of it for prostate cancer as a first-line therapy, not as a salvage treatment. So it's really interesting, and I think the idea that we can find energy in our environment and then use that energy to make these changes in the body it's very inspiring. I will say that, you know, again, and I as a journalist, you know, I always got to be the skeptic to some extent here. I always got to ask the additional questions. So I'll give you an example, Mike. When you do deep brain stimulation, you're putting a stimulator in the brain that you can turn on, you can turn off, you can turn down, you can turn up, you can modulate. When you use sound energy to make a lesion in the brain, that's it. You don't have a chance to sort of reverse that at all. So you have to get it absolutely right. And I think that's why there was this slow roll into these technologies. We've known how to use sound energy to change a brain for a long time, but we wanted to make sure we could do it in a way that was very predictable and obviously wasn't going to cause harm.
So Dr. Gupta, you have another challenge. CNN is seen all over the world. People have different perspectives all over the world. And so as you travel, you get feedback. How does the public view the healthcare system? How is it evolving? And what are the reactions from different places of the world, because they're not just watching you in the United States today?
That is a very important question. It's a challenging question to answer because it is a very heterogeneous sort of look at healthcare. If you look, obviously, you know, we had as Dr. Rice knows better than anybody, we had a terrible tragedy this past week with regards to what happened with the United Health executive. I think what has surprised, a lot of people has been the response to this, somewhat vitriolic response to basically say this was a manifestation of a healthcare insurance industry gone awry. I think that's deplorable, but that is something that you're hearing out there. What is interesting is I think there's a real bifurcation. If you overall poll people, just to take the United States in particular, only about 44% of people say their healthcare system is very good or excellent. Right. So more than half say it's not. But when it comes to their own physicians, their own healthcare providers, their nurses, their PAs, it goes into the 70, even 75% range in terms of very good or excellent care. So people like their healthcare teams, even if they criticize the system at the same time. And I think it's part of the reason we don't get a lot of traction, you know, when big elections come around. People don't often vote on healthcare as a primary driver because they're split. They think reforms are necessary, but at the same time, they think they get really good care from the people that provide it for them.
Dr. Rice, a lot of the students coming in are very comfortable with technology. You know, if I have a problem, I can talk to my grandchildren, tell me how to solve the problem. So the students might be more used to technology today. What about your professors? What about your staff? How are they adapting to these dramatic changes?
They are very, very receptive to retraining and uptraining. I have always been surprised. I mean, you know, I think about when we went from, what was it, the Kodachrome slide to PowerPoint. That was a big jump for all of us, right? Yes. They are embracing it. And they are partnering with the students to make sure that they are not missing out on the technological advances of how they should be using all of social media, even TikTok, in the classroom as part of the learning tool. And we have them on our curriculum redevelopment communities, or as we are refining our curriculum. We have the students there having their voice because they are such different learners than what we are. And we have to embrace that. And so I appreciate all of the great faculty who've been great professors using the same textbook for the last 20-some years that nobody actually has a paper textbook now, and now they are having to be responsive to the students' needs. And we're not teaching in the classroom like we used to. I mean, every class is already filmed, etc. And so it is really case-based learning and interactive sessions and simulation and virtual reality, trying to address the complexities that we face as we try to take care of the public.
Well, those students at Morehouse are lucky they have such a young president and CEO from that standpoint. So, in closing, Jonathan, you are now at a place where you are passing out funds, not requesting.
Well, I'm investing.
Excuse me, investing. So we might have a lot of people with us online or in the audience today want to know, how do they approach the Bernie Marcus Foundation? How do they approach you if they're interested in medical-related philanthropy? How are they going to get you to invest in them? What are you focused on?
Well, to quote a great philanthropist, you are your website. Bernie directed last year that we evolve a website because Bernie's very activist form of philanthropy was go out and seek problems the world needed to solve. So basically, we would find you, like the Stroke Center, which is the world's leading stroke center at Grady, right? Oh. Mm-hmm. Or creating the first autism center, the Marcus Autism, in the world, like as MD Anderson created MD Anderson Cancer Center. So you can go to marcusfoundation.org and you can drop off an idea. Also,
so if
in
we
the
do
book,
that,
though,
if we do that, Jonathan, let me get.
Yeah.
How do you read those ideas when they come in?
Yes.
Okay.
And
good.
actually, we're using a large language model developed by 2 biomedical engineers at Georgia Tech.
That's
Go
right.
Jackets.
Go Jackets.
To read every one of them and lift up what everyone on this stage understands. Like keyword in medicine, we have a shorthand called. We have keywords for things like coronary artery disease or ischemic injury. So we are actually taking this and basically sorting it into the 4 areas where Bernie's legacy is going to be made in medical philanthropy. One is basically drugging the undruggable in cancer, making entirely new kinds of medicines for cancers that become advanced that we can't cure. So there's cancer. Stem cells, or how to basically regenerative medicine. That's area 2 that's focused. Area 3 is autism, reducing the number of children who are severely autistic and actually developing precision treatments. And of course, last and very dear to Bernie's heart is ending really death and suffering from stroke. And in 2 of those areas at Georgia Tech with the Stem Cell Center, and at Grady and Emory and Morehouse with the Stroke Center, Atlanta really leads the world in these areas, although we're looking nationally. But the handbook for the foundation actually Mike wrote, which Bernie's made everyone read in the foundation after it came out.
Thank you, and I want to thank our panelists to take us to the future of healthcare. And thank you for joining us.